Welcome, everyone. I'm Marianne Brownlow. Welcome to Hill Center, but most enthusiastically, welcome back to The Life of a Poet, a series that we inaugurated in 2013 and has been on hiatus since March 2020. When we launched the program in 2013, the poet that we wanted to inaugurate the program was Elizabeth Alexander for so many different reasons, but one of which was that she's a homegirl, you know, she grew up on Capitol Hill. Her babysitter is here, as well as other friends. And we're so honored to have you come back to help us relaunch this new iteration of the series that is now being helmed by the very accomplished poet, writer, Kyle Dargan, and Kyle is also the assistant director of the creative writing program at American University. There's our friends at East City Bookshop have books for sale. Elizabeth has just pre-signed her books, and Kyle will be signing books following the conversation. There are short bios of each of them, so I won't take up any more time telling you any more about them because you are about to learn a great deal this evening. So please join me in welcoming Elizabeth Alexander and Kyle Dargan.
Can you all hear me? Mike's good? Nice.
Say more.
Try again.
There's a switch on top. Just make sure it's not on.
Okay.
There we go.
Better?
Yeah.
Good. All right. Well, thank you all.
Am I okay? Yes, I can hear me.
Sounds
Yeah, great.
Well, thank you all for coming for the relaunch of this event. I've been to a number of these events myself when Ron Charles was heading things, and I appreciated those conversations. And I'm really excited to take the conversation in another direction with the esteemed Elizabeth Alexander, who we're so fortunate to have back with us on the Hill. I think in relaunching this, Marianne and I, and thank you, Marianne, we were thinking about what we wanted to call it, if we wanted to change the name in any way. And at first I said, no, it'll be fine, because people will recognize the old title. But as I was preparing for this conversation, I think I realized that I actually want to call it maybe The Mind of a Poet. Because I think that's the thing that people maybe has less access to, maybe make more erroneous assumptions about, and might learn more from. So I'm hoping to try to pick through Elizabeth's mind a bit today. So that is the goal as we move forward. So to begin, we are both Black poets, and one of the things that Black poets are very familiar with is the idea of the tradition, in terms of those whose shoulders we stand upon. And I wanted to start thinking about the mind of a poet with the tradition from which the poet's mind grows. And reading through your writing, there are a number of poets that you focus on and reference. Of course, there's Gwendolyn Brooks, who I would say sort of aesthetically is someone who reminds me more of your own writing. I would say like maybe a Hayden too. But someone else that you always tend to mention in your writing is Lucille Clifton. And I feel a bit blasphemous now knowing that there's an actual church service going on beneath us. But one of the things I always like to tell people is that when I say the good book, I mean the Bible. But when I say the Bible, I mean this, which is Lucille Clifton's Collected. So I was wondering if you could talk a bit about how and why Lucille Clifton has the space that she does in your personal canon.
Yeah, well, first of all, I am so happy to be here. And I don't want to get too emotional before we get started, but you know, this is the neighborhood I grew up in, and people who I love and who looked after me and are here today. And there's all kinds of looking after. So it was amazing to see you coming in from Lamas Bookstore, which was over on 7th Street, and where I learned so much, coming in on Saturdays and just sitting on the floor and reading books and having conversations. The beautiful space of bookstores on Capitol Hill, as we all know. Nikki, this new bookstore that I didn't know about, was so formative. So it is beautiful to be here. Who remembers where Friendship House was?
It's still there.
It's close, right? It's
This way and it's
between
okay.
7 and D.
Okay, that's, because of course, it's not a hard neighborhood to get around, but I was remembering Friendship House and going to summer day camp there and so many things. So I could go on and on and on, but it is beautiful to be here and beautiful to be home. I'll say also, just to kind of maybe get the emotion out of the way, but of course, I'm thinking about my beautiful late father, who so many of you knew, and who I am feeling here today. So I'm really glad for that. I just want to feel him. Let's feel Clifford Alexander right now, right now. And I'm happy to be here with you, Kyle. I'm so happy to be here with you. I admire you so very much, your work, but also your integrity and the way you move in the world. So thank you. And to Lucille Clifton. So that's a very smart question, of course. And I think that I would add to poets whose maybe obvious traces are in my poems, I would add Michael Harper. I think that probably my poems sound like his, but also have a similar mining of African American history, family history, and the insistence on telling those stories. But, to Lucille, there are so many aspects of her that I aspire to. So I think in some ways I name her because I aspire to her distillation. I aspire to her economy. Even if I wouldn't necessarily make poems that look like that, the purity and the essentialness of them. I think that moving through life and hopefully accruing some wisdom along the way, and very particularly the mother wit of Lucille's work. In preparing for tonight, and it was really a great pleasure because now in my work I don't do this kind of thing so much. So I went back, I read every poem I ever wrote. And there were really good ones, I must say. But in looking through, I thought, oh, that understanding that Lucille has of the absolute proximity of life to death, and the way that every shut-eye ain't sleep, and the way that she understands that. I realize I've been around those lines for a long time, and then, really full on in The Light of the World, and really full on in the Trayvon generation in prose, but in poems as well. I think of a poem like Autumn Passage, which feels to me very much like a Lucille informed poem. It's not very long, and so.
Do you want it? Yes.
Here we go. I got it right here. And that understanding, I would put this next to. So this is Autumn Passage. On suffering, which is real, on the mouth that never closes, the air that dries the mouth. On the miraculous dying body, its greens and purples, on the beauty of hair itself. On the dazzling toddler, like eggplant, he says, when you say vegetable, chrysanthemum to flower. On his grandmother's suffering, larger than vanished skyscrapers, September zucchini, other things too big. For her glory that goes along with it, glory of grown children's vigil, communal fealty, glory of the body that operates even as it falls apart, the body that can no longer even make fever but nonetheless burns, florid and bright and magnificent, as it dims as it shrinks, as it turns to something else. And I would put that poem next to, in the Bible, one of my very favorites of Lucille's. And of course, in this big old Bible, it takes just a minute, but this is actually kind of earlier. I'm not going to tell you what it is because I want to give you the pleasure of.
I think they have a titles index in the back too. Of that.
Ah, yeah. Let's do that.
Yeah.
Let's do that. Let's do that.
Which I wish they had in Crave Radiance too. But.
Oh, and actually, you know, the very last poem that Lucille wrote, the last poem which she wrote days before she passed is one I would put next to this. In the middle of the eye, not knowing whether to call it devil or God, I asked how to be brave, and the thunder answered, stand, accept. So I stood and withstood the fiery sight. So, I mean, I would say maybe that poem aspires to the understanding of this poem. And the other one, we can you know, come to it later, but is the light that came to Lucille Clifton. You know, the light that came to Lucille Clifton came in a shift of knowing. And in that poem, she speaks to her dead husband, Fred Clifton, in a very fluid and matter-of-fact, you know, kind of way across the veil. So, so that's how I think about Lucille. Also, just you know, Lucille in life was I love her very much. And you know, a story I've told before, but it's just, you know, fun. So Lucille Clifton, as you probably know, had 6 children, stair-step children. Which, I mean, the very thought, you know. And when, you know, they asked about, well, why do you write poems that are so short? Yeah, I have 6 children. Why do I write poems that are so short? What are the perfect conditions for writing a poem? You know, not a room of one's own, but it's the kitchen table. Someone has the measles, someone threw up, you know, and so I make these short poems. And so when my first son was born and I went to the Cave Canem Poetry Workshop to teach, and I brought him at 10 weeks, did not know what I was doing in this job of mother. So, you know, like, I kept the child alive, but, you know, that was about it. The child is 25 now, right? But in that community, I was kind of like holding a stack of books, holding the baby, like trying to eat, trying to teach poetry, trying to figure out how to nurse him, doing all the things. And Lucille just took him from me. And she was the first person I let do that, who wasn't, you know, like his father or my parents, pretty much. And she said, girl, eat. You know, eat. She said, but do it fast. So someone who would do that and who would also show and talk about being all the things at the same time, but sometimes there's more of one and less of the other, but you're always all the things. And also what it means to fully teach a poet, you know, in the wholeness of it.
Right.
So, and you know, she was funny and so many things, you know, so I love her very, very much. And she showed me how to be a citizen of poetry, because she also, for me and for many, many, many others, you know, she would say, you know, people underestimate me. They think I'm just mama. You know, they think that's how I am, because she also was a lovely and gracious person. But she took people to task. She got people included and on stages where they weren't. And so doing that work has been, I mean, I learned that from more than Lucille, but has been a modus operandi for me in life.
Yeah, I mean, I recommend Lucille Clifton's work to my students. I never teach it in class for the fear that someone would underestimate her and I would lose my mind.
Yeah, right?
So I say,
Can't do that.
yeah, I can't do that in the classroom, but that would be the impulse if someone was to suggest to me that her work was simple. in some way, which has happened.
Well, now also you did not mention the person whose work I hope mine most looks like, who we share in common.
I thought that might be too easy. But
This would be Rita Dove,
yeah.
who certainly is someone who I not only learned from in that osmosis way, but also, you know, consciously learned from her. Although I sometimes will see patterns, or like in my early poem of mine, The Venus Hottentot, it absolutely borrows its structure from Parsley.
Parsley, yeah.
But I wasn't aware of that when I did it. I just knew that she was the person who rocked my world in every way, and who I read backwards and forwards.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that Rita taught me, that it took me years to figure out what it actually meant, was that a poem always needs to sing in some way, right? That music is always not the same, but the poem needs to sing.
Yes.
So that is definitely something that is true about your work as well. It is always work that, regardless of the subject, is finding that way to sing. So I hear that there as well. To maybe jump back to Lucille Clifton being a mother and balancing the art and life, you are an extremely busy person, an extremely important person. And I think you've said that you're not writing as much poetry now as you have been in the past. That can be a difficult decision, right, to have to make a difficult surrender. But I'm wondering, for people who maybe have not spent that time dedicating their life to trying to write poems, and sort of understanding the toll that it takes to do that on a daily basis, to have your mind open to poetry every day. What is it about the greediness of poetry's muse that makes it difficult to sort of share space with an increasingly complicated life?
Yeah. Well, I think, so the work I do now is so I was a college professor for the day job for many years, and that is compatible with being a poet. I mean, there's never enough time, although I must say, now that I have a 9 to 9 job, I was like, girl, you had all the time in the damn world, like, you know. But, you know, you're always working as a writer and a professor, but still, I would go into the classroom and I would talk about poems, or talk about Black culture, or talk about Black history, you know, talk about things that fed my work. I was working in a place that valued my identity as a poet. So there was nothing at odds with being that, even though always trying to find time. And now it's just a very different kind of work in philanthropy, but also I am on a mission in philanthropy. You know, my dad said, you better give that money away fast, baby, before they figure out what you're doing. You better, you know, go in there and rob the bank before they take the keys back. And so, when I came to the presidency of the Mellon Foundation, I, you know, turned it in the direction, we are a social justice philanthropy. We completely turned the demographics of the place around. Our mandate was every dollar we spend, not just the grants, who we hire, who our vendors are, every single thing was going to be more just and equitable. And that all of our grant making was going to serve under-resourced, you know, communities, projects, voices, and that we were trying to do big and glorious things with those resources, because people are doing big and glorious things. And that I started in Trump. So resources that are, you know, relatively, I mean, they're coming for philanthropy now too, you know, but resources that are relatively, you can get them out the door quickly. And to be an arts, culture, and humanities foundation, when the very things that we resource are under attack, and that the learning that we support in ethnic studies, so forth and so, is being criminalized in so many places. And the creativity that we support is being banned in many places. And we have a monuments project where we are trying to support. So if you went to the beautiful monuments project, the art monuments on the Mall recently, that was our project. And that's, you know, so that's what we do, right? And let me tell you, people love their Confederate statues. Today, people love their Confederate statues. So doing that work quickly is the right thing to be doing now. That takes creativity, that takes intelligence, that takes stamina, that takes energy, that takes muscle. So I feel good about, like, you can't juggle all balls at the same time. That said, when 7 years ago I left the academy and went first to the Ford Foundation before going to Mellon, when I taught my last class, I wept. And I thought that not writing poems, I didn't decide not to. To your question about the greed, I think it's like what Rita said about the music. I could write poems, but to write bad poems would be the worst thing in the world. To write poems where I could not find the music, you know, where I lost that groove, where I didn't stay in it immersively enough to be able to catch the lightning, right? Then, you know, the feeling of writing poorly is untenable. It is untenable. I think also in writing prose, because in the way that life takes you to things, when my, you know, beautiful, beloved husband passed away so unexpectedly 11 years ago, I did not think that writing was where I would go, but it was. And though that book is not poems, it comes from the exact same place. And, you know, it was our mutual friend Terrence Hayes who said to me, like, I'm not writing poems, I'm not writing poems. And he'd say, you are moving through the world as a poet. What does that mean? What does that mean? You know, you made that book. What is that? Like, to what you and I were talking about out here, like, what is a book of poems?
Yeah.
Why is the book of poems the ultimate form? People often ask me very kindly, you know, like, oh, like, when's your next book of poems coming out? And in the beginning, I used to say, like, I am tired, y'all. Like, I am working so hard. Right. But it's a beautiful impulse. But I think, to me, the question is more, are you working? Are you giving? Are you growing? Are you generative? And how are you living in your music? Because to be able to do the work that I'm doing in philanthropy, I got to have some words. I got to have some real words that make social justice something as big and enormous and encompassing and true as it is.
And vision.
And yeah, and you got to have some vision. You got to have some ideas, you know. I'll say one more thing, which is that I think I was given an unexpected gift when my first son was born. And I thought, you know, now I am a mother. I shall not write because I shall raise my child. You know, I thought, like, somehow. And in the middle of the night, you know, nursing this child in the blue, deep, dark blue, I would have words. And I always felt like it was that child who said to me, you're still who you are. You know, I mean, because as it turned out, becoming a mother opened up a very powerful time in my poetry. And I did not expect that. So I feel like that was, I got extra early. And, like, we'll just see how the chapters go.
Speaking of the poetry persisting in other ways, would you be open to reading from that first chapter of Light of the World? Because I think there's, in a particular way, and throughout the book, but in that opening, a particular way in which the poetic is present in the prose.
Yes. I will read anything you ask me to read. So this is the Light of the World. And this first section is called Last Night on Earth. The story seems to begin with catastrophe, but in fact began earlier and is not a tragedy, but rather a love story. Perhaps tragedies are only tragedies in the presence of love, which confers meaning to loss. Loss is not felt in the absence of love. The queen died and then the king died is a plot wrote E.M. Forster in The Art of the Novel, but the queen died, and then the king died of grief is a story. It begins on a beautiful April morning when a man wakes exhausted and returns to sleep in his beloved 13-year-old son's trundle bed, declaring, "This is the most comfortable bed I have ever slept in." Or it begins when the wife says goodbye to the man a few hours later, walking in front of his car, switching her hips a bit, a blown kiss as she heads to her office, and he continues on to his painting studio. Or the story begins as he packs a tote bag with the usual slim thermos of strong coffee made in an Italian stovetop mocha pot, a larger thermos of cold water, 2 tangerines, a package of Nat Sherman MCD cigarettes, and a plastic sack of raw almonds. The tote is astral blue and printed with Giotto angels. Off to his studio for a day of painting, then home as if nothing extraordinary has happened, when in fact he has been envisioning worlds, hanging the Giotto bag on a hook in the mudroom and changing out of his paint-splattered jeans into gym shorts and a t-shirt for yoga in the family room or a run on the treadmill in the basement. And then skipping ahead a bit, I am the wife of 15 years. I am the plumpish wife, the pretty wife, the loving wife, the smart wife, the American wife. I am eternally his wife. Perhaps the story begins with the 36 lottery tickets he bought 2 days before he died, which I discovered weeks later when they fluttered out of the pages of one of the many books he was reading. Or it began when I met him 16 years before. That was always a good story, an actual coup de foudre, a bolt of lightning, love at first sight. I felt a visceral torque. I would tell people, literal churn of my organs, not butterfly, not arousal, rather a not unpleasant rotation of my innards as never before. Lightning struck and did not curdle the cream, but instead turned it to sweet silken butter. Lightning turned sand into glass.
Thank you. So maybe you all could hear it in the prose as Elizabeth was reading, but there's a pattern of repetition happening in the prose with the it begins, also with the I am the wife, I am the wife. We refer to that in the business as anaphora, that repetition at the beginning of the line. And I guess I wanted to ask you, because funny, speaking of Terrence, in his last book, the one that was nominated for a National Book Award.
Yeah.
Yeah,
all the books.
For my future
so many
assassins.
books.
Yeah, so there was a lot of anaphora in that book.
Yeah.
And someone was asking me at that time, because I was in the middle of the pandemic, you know, what does poetry look like right now in the middle of the pandemic? And I said, well, one of the things I noticed is that I think people are relying on anaphora, sort of this retelling or this ability to kind of go back to the beginning again and again and again, as if sort of the trial of the present is something that drives us back to the beginning. And I was wondering for you, in that passage, but maybe sort of more broadly, how do you find that type of repetition, anaphora, useful to you as a poet? That ability to sort of go back and reconsider again and again and again in a single piece.
Yeah, that's a neat question. Well, I think one way that I use anaphora a lot in my foundation work right now is using anaphora to tell our history and to tell it truthfully, because it's being overwritten with lies, which I would not have predicted. So, you know, it becomes a way to say, you know, no, you know, the Confederate monument, you know, they lost the war, so why are they portrayed as victorious? That's not history. This is the history of white supremacy, which we will understand if we look at the fact that Confederate monuments were put up 100 years after the war was over to make you think that they were put up in the 1860s. You know, so like back to those stories to counter, you know, all of the myths that have resurfaced but are passing as history. If you look at the overturning of affirmative action, you know, that is absolutely premised on a lie that everything is the deserved property of white people, and that if, you know, it's being taken away from them. So I think that kind of, you know, not negative anaphora, but, you know, anaphora to continue to tell the truth when the truth is so contested is one important use.
A persistence.
The persistence. And I think also, you know, in a positive way, again, I'm just thinking about my present work as it ties to this question of being a poet. I find that I am able to distill some things very potently, and so to affirm the positive over and over and over again in public utterance, I think has been a useful tool, a poet's tool that goes into the other work. I think in, you know, in Black traditions, in the way in which, you know, Prince tells us there is joy in repetition, and we do not have anxiety about repetition. We could tell the same story 100 ways over again. We can, you know, use the same phrases with different inflections. We can even, I live in New York, and I heard someone on the street the other day, just in that way that, you know, you pass someone in conversation going the other way, and so you're in the same soundscape for just a little bit. He said, like I told him from the get-go. And I thought about, oh, from the get-go. That is such a good phrase. But he said it like with a little bit of a different dip in it, you know, from how I might have heard somebody say it a week before. So that joy in repetition.
Oh, one more again.
You know, repetition and revision. I mean, that characterizes our rhetorical tradition, our musical tradition, and I think our gestural tradition. And I think the idea of originality being so singular and having to push other things out of its place is at odds with the experience of Black culture. So that is to say, there is no anxiety of influence around, like, yes, you know, I took this from Gwendolyn Brooks, Rita Dove took this from Gwendolyn Brooks, then I you know, like that's actually pride of lineage.
Right, tradition.
You know, tradition, yeah, tradition. So anaphora marks that.
Cool.
Yeah.
So I did, everyone in your program, you have a copy of one of Elizabeth's poems, because I wanted to do a collective reading.
Oh.
And sort of go through, maybe as a class would, to give you some of this,
Okay.
that class time back, some of the decisions that you were making as you were putting the poem together. Because again, back to that idea of the mind of a poet, I think that's one of the things that people really get a glimpse of.
Let's do that.
But before we do that,
Okay.
one quick question. In an interview when you were talking about preparing the inaugural poem,
Yeah.
one of the things you mentioned, sort of part of the challenge, is that you said that you feel like you write poems that are meant to be read, as in off of paper. And I'm not sure that's a sentiment that everyone who isn't a poet, or maybe
Yeah.
a writer, but particularly a poet,
Yeah.
understands. So could you say a little bit about what you mean when you say you feel like you're a poet who's meant to be read?
Yeah, in the context of the inaugural poem.
You can, but...
Yeah, that poem was so hard to write.
But you did it. That's why you're a
did it.
hero.
I did it. I know I did it. You know, kind of in the middle of writing it on a rather tight time frame, it occurred to me that yes, poems meant to be read, but always to be read. You know, so I mean, I think a poem, no matter how beautifully it worked on the page, has to be able to be speakable. But I think that, you know, I come from a page tradition rather than, you know, I said that at the time when, you know, there were performance poets, you know, page poets and stage poets. And I wasn't trying not to be that. I was just saying, like, you know, I'm cute, but I'm not like a performer. You know what I mean? I mean, like, I do it well, but that's not what that's not a part of the whole thing. It needs to succeed on the page, hopefully for a long, 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 long time. And that poems are made of other poems, and my poems are made of poems in books. You know, they're made of other things too. They're made of listening, they're made of music, but they're also made of poems in books. And actually, I didn't want that to ever get lost, because I think there's a way in which, you know, at that time that I said that, there was a little bit, you know, we were supposed to just kind of spring up like a genie and like, spit.
Right.
But, I read a lot of poems and a lot of books, and that's why I want to make poems, because I've read them and I want to make things like that. So to writing that poem in the middle, I thought like, oh my God, most people will never ever read it, because the important moment is the moment of, the zillion people. It's the moment that performs, and what was so extraordinary, beyond extraordinary, that here, everybody had elected this new president. It was a moment of history. It was a moment of so many people being involved. It was a moment of profound hopefulness. It was a moment that, our elders, I cannot tell you, it was like a trope of friends of mine, Black friends, who were like, my parents said they'd never live to see the day. Literally 3 friends of mine whose parents died at the end of January after they saw Obama inaugurated. I mean, it was that deep and that powerful. And he had said art and music will be a part of this day. So the important moment was helping that moment happen. So trying to write something that did both things was a challenge. And also, in making other poems luxuriously, I always want to be clear and communicate, but I never in poems thought like, oh, I can't use that word. Because I feel like the beauty of, if you don't know, that's why I know words. I don't know it, I look it up, and you have time with it. But in this instance, I did have to think, I want people to understand every word in the moment. There's no dictionary. So that was just a little bit of a different way of operating.
Yeah, and then speaking of like understanding in the moment, so I was there up front sitting with a bunch of Tuskegee Airmen.
Woo!
Talking about the elders, and like that was,
oof.
So when you got up there, I don't know if people really understood what was going on, and I heard, at first I thought you said praise song for the dead. So at first I heard a praise song and I was like, oh, that's the Black thing. And then I heard for the dead and I was like, oh, she's gonna go there.
I did go there.
You did go there, that's the thing. And I think that's one of the interesting things about that poem is like it sets the listener or the reader up to gradually accept that painful part too. And maybe we can come back to that, but I do want to make sure we
have class.
Yeah, we got to get to this poem because everybody has it. So I picked Crash because
Crash we're gonna do. Okay, all right. I'm glad you picked this.
I feel like we're sort of in this space of somewhat recovery following COVID, and I felt like the sentiment of this poem in some way spoke to where we are. So I was wondering if you could read it.
Sure.
And I have some questions about decisions that you made as you were putting this poem together.
Okay, and what I'll say too is that this was published in a book called Antebellum Dream Book. And in that book, I had such a wonderful time writing a lot of poems that had in them, I've always been a very vivid dreamer. And I think that how that correlates with writing poetry is in dreams, there's so much strange juxtaposition, there's so much metaphor, there's so much weird language, so you think like, why was the word like, silver in my dream? And then you realize, oh, it was a play on a word because really you were preoccupied with something, I love that about dreamscapes, and I think that it's very fertile for sparking aspects of poems. So that's the book that it comes from. Crash. I am the last woman off of the plane that has crashed in a cornfield near Philly, picking through hot metal for my rucksack and diaper bag. No black box, no fuselage, just sister girl pilot wiping soot from her eyes, happy to be alive. Her dreadlocks will hold the smoke for weeks. All the white passengers bailed out before impact, so certain a sister couldn't navigate the crash. Oh, gender. O race, O ye of little faith. Here we are in the cornfield, bruised and dirty, but alive. I invite Sister Girl Pilot home for dinner at my parents' for my mother's roast chicken with gravy and rice to celebrate.
Thank you. So my first question is, one could imagine a version of this poem that actually ends after that first line in the penultimate stanza. I mean, here we are in the cornfield, bruised and dirty but alive. But you don't stop there. You push forward to this other moment to end the poem, which seems very far from the crash. Why?
So I'm speculating, right? You know, because I sort of don't altogether know. I'm sure I wanted to write Sister Girl Pilot. I think, you know, to move from so certain a sister couldn't navigate the crash, and then Sister Girl Pilot, she's mine. I'm part of her, you know, and she's unprecedented. You never saw, I still, so part of the magic in the poem, I still have never knowingly been flown by a black woman. I can't wait till that day comes. And I'm so old school that on the rare occasion that there's a black pilot, I stop in the cockpit, I say hello. And also with a black pilot or a woman pilot, I assume they're very, 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 very excellent. And I think that plane's not gonna crash because of what it took for them to, you know. One time I was going to Puerto Rico, I had a Puerto Rican pilot, I saluted. I was like, we are getting to Puerto Rico. We are getting there. So I think that that movement from pilot who's a sister to Sister Girl Pilot and, you know, into the family space, into the home, into the iconic home meal, certainly in my parents' home. I mean, what do you think? That's just some thoughts, but it doesn't totally answer the question.
No, I mean, I was thinking about, but yeah, I mean, of course, like I also, I mean, we're not really talking about this book, but I think about The Black Interior too, which was your first prose book.
Actually,
right?
before that, was Power and Possibility before that? No, The Black Interior, you're right. Yep, thank you.
Yeah, and so of course, like I remember that opening of the book and how, I guess, representative the interior of a black home is.
Yes.
And so to me, it's like there's this, the poem is titled Crash, right? Which sets you up for one thing.
Yep.
But it's not a somber poem.
Yeah.
It's a poem that ends in celebration.
Yes, it does.
And so in that way, I figured it would make sense that, well, where else would you put the celebration with the Sister Girl Pilot except sort of in the black interior?
Oh, I like
the
that.
Black,
Yeah,
the black
yeah.
home.
Well, and I think, you know, the mention of Philly in the beginning, it's not Philadelphia, it's Philly. I went to graduate school in Philadelphia. I love, you know, Philadelphia. It's a city I know, but also if you're familiar with it, you call it Philly. So I think it's like, you know, any mid-Atlantic black space USA. You know, a certain kind of black space USA is what the choice of Philly gives us.
Yeah. And to that, even though it is celebration, the meal is not, you know, ostentatious. It's it's grand because it's humble.
Yep, yep.
Right? And that sort of that humility of survival. In terms of thinking how, you know, if black people threw a parade every time they survived something, we'd be marching all the time.
Ooh, that's right, that's right. But we'll always have some chicken and rice.
Right,
Yes.
that you can have that moment before you move forward into what happens after that. So I just thought it was an interesting sort of extension. Like, you know, sometimes one of the things I'm always telling my students is like, well, maybe the poem's not done where you think it is.
I love that. I love that. Well, and also, I mean, I think a thing that I love in teaching, because it's like a little bit of a magic trick, is when you say, let's see what happens if you lop off the ending. You know, just what happens? You know, do you need to write beyond it or do you need to cut away from it? I think also one thing that, why I'm glad that you brought this poem out is that there's an idea in it that I think is very persistent. and that certainly, you know, through my own leadership kinds of jobs has persisted. But, you know, just the other day when the magnificent Miss Coco Gauff won that tournament, she said, "I would like to thank all the people who didn't believe in me. You thought you were putting water on my fire, but instead you were putting gasoline." So, all the white passengers bailed out before impact. That's a Toni Morrisonian idea. Like, wow, you all would rather drown than let a black woman save you. So certain a sister couldn't navigate the crash. You have so underestimated us at your own peril. At your own peril. So I think that, you know, again, like I don't sort of go in with idea first, but I find that that idea is, you know, still very much with us.
Yeah, and there you have that musically reinforced with the repetition, as we were discussing, the O gender, O race, O ye of little faith. And also there, the way the rhyme ties that together. Another question, because I think this is one of those things that maybe people who don't write poetry understand, the decisions that go into the shape. So I have some ideas, but I'm curious, why couplets? Why two-line stanzas for this poem?
Well, you know, when I make poems, I sort of make mass. You know, I kind of make lines, and then the shape really does start to emerge. And I don't like to be overly tidy, but shapeliness and form. So, you know, the one poetry teacher I had was Derek Walcott, very, very strict formalist. And that was not my tradition. And that was not my generation. I wasn't going to be a poet like that. But I learned a great deal from his shapeliness, and that I like to make those shapes, and that forms should evolve, right? And so he would say, keep writing and the shape will emerge. And when he first said that to me, I thought, like, that is, I don't even get it. But the more, I thought, oh, wow. And sometimes I might try it different ways. I think a lot about white space, about aeration, about the pause and the beat and the time of wherever you put that space. But it just comes from working with, you know, kind of put all the clay of the black words on the page and then see where you need to make some space.
Yeah, so I definitely feel the space. I also feel the couplet, as the closeness between the speaker and the sister girl pilot.
Oh, nice. I love that. That's great.
As two in that poem as well.
That's great. You know, also something that's in here, like deep, deep, deep in the referentiality, but I wrote this poem when my kids were, you know, they were maybe 2 and 3. You know, I was a new to motherhood. And I remember there was this story that I would think about a lot, that, you know, supposedly, like, you know, Susan Johnson's baby got caught under a VW, and she found superhuman strength, and with her one hand lifted the VW off the baby. Yeah. You know, and I was like, that is me. I am that mighty. And so I think that coming to terms with that, when also trying to be like a good mother with so many things that come up every day, and also that, you know, kind of heart outside your body, as they say, thing about, you know, my child could be in danger. I mean, like that, the primalness, you know, my child, if I don't feed my child will die. You know, if I don't clothe and take care of my child will suffer. So I think I was very fresh in that idea of, like, what does mightiness look like?
Yeah, no, I'm glad you said that, because that stanza, that second stanza, to me, when I read it, I see so much of black womanhood and black motherhood there, because in this moment, right, where the plane has crashed, what is the first thing we see the speaker reaching for? It's these implements to take care of someone else. Right? Not their self. And that I found particularly interesting. I guess, I think I've nerded out about this poem enough, just
Thank
to give
you for that, though.
give people a peek into the poem. But one more question while we're talking structure, and I know you all don't have it in front of you, but some of you may know it. But praise song for the day, it's in tercets, right? So a tercet is a 3-line stanza instead of 2.
I'm gonna read it from the book. Yes. Thank you for that, though.
And tercets suggest an imbalance, right? Because it's a 3, it's an odd number.
Yep.
And I wondered if that sense of imbalance or iffiness, shakiness, might have been something you were thinking about when you were structuring the poem.
Yeah, no, but that's a great read. Yeah. Shall I read it?
Sure.
Okay. So this is praise song for the day, which I don't read very often. I have always thought of it as very much belonging to that day, having work to do on that day, as I said earlier. But I love to read it. So praise song for the day. Each day we go about our business, walking past each other, catching each other's eyes or not, about to speak or speaking. All about us is noise. All about us is noise and bramble, thorn and din, each one of our ancestors on our tongues. Someone is stitching up a hem, darning a hole in a uniform, patching a tire, repairing the things in need of repair. Someone is trying to make music somewhere with a pair of wooden spoons on an oil drum, with cello, boombox, harmonica, voice. A woman and her son wait for the bus. A farmer considers the changing sky. A teacher says, "Take out your pencils, begin." We encounter each other in words, words spiny or smooth, whispered or declaimed, words to consider, reconsider. We cross dirt roads and highways that mark the will of someone and then others who said, "I need to see what's on the other side. I know there's something better down the road. We need to find a place where we are safe. We walk into that which we cannot yet see." Say it plain that many have died for this day. Sing the names of the dead who brought us here, who laid the train tracks, raised the bridges, picked the cotton and the lettuce, built brick by brick the glittering edifices they would then keep clean and work inside of. Praise song for struggle, praise song for the day. Praise song for every hand-lettered sign, the figuring it out at kitchen tables. Some live by love thy neighbor as thyself, others by first do no harm or take no more than you need. What if the mightiest word is love? Love beyond marital, filial, national. Love that casts a widening pool of light. Love with no need to preempt grievance. In today's sharp sparkle, this winter air, anything can be made, any sentence begun. On the brink, on the brim, on the cusp. Praise song for walking forward in that light.
So the first line of that poem, each day we go about our business. Mm-hmm. And I've heard you talk about it in a number of places, and it really seems like you felt that working on that poem was an act of duty.
Yes. Can't say no.
Yeah.
You know.
And I think that's a connection to what you do now,
yeah. Mm-hmm.
Right? It's that similar sense of duty, right? And this is where my creativity...
I was prepared for it.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, I actually do feel like that's, like, I'm supposed to serve.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How are we on time? Should we wrap up? Yeah?
Okay.
5 more minutes? Okay. So I guess one related question to wrap things up. So your buddy, President Obama. During the end of his presidency, he was vocally concerned with this idea of the empathy gap. And there's this quote, I can't find it, I always look for it, but I remember listening to him talking about it and say that, you know, at some point sort of the current attention or sympathy that we see white America extending to the travails of black people is going to dry up. And I feel like that's something that you begin to speak to a bit at the beginning of the Trayvon generation. That it feels like right now there's actually a ratcheting up of violence against black people. But I guess sort of, you know, with that idea of the empathy gap in mind, and we can imagine that it still persists, what do you, as someone in your current position, feel that funding the arts, funding humanities, like what kind of headway can that type of investment make against that empathy gap, which may be killing us all?
Yeah. All is very, very crucial because, you know, the person who does harm is dehumanized and meager in spirit and condemned to be someone who lives with the fact that they've done harm, whether or not they reflect on it. And I think, I believe that in great art, that in great language, let's stay with our art form, in poetry, in the word, and in saying the word of another, in reading out a Lucille poem and taking it into your body and saying it out. It is transporting. It creates empathy, not in the sense of, you know, what the word means, right? Like feeling to get, you know, not just like, I, you know, feel sorry for you, but feeling, standing in the shoes of another, standing in the language of another. I really, really, truly believe that there is a superpower in that. I really, truly believe, you know, when we listen to music or witness great art, you know, that can make us weep, that can enter our bodies and make us do an involuntary thing, right? There's very, very little that can do that. And that does it at the level of, you know, there of course can be cerebral aspects to experiencing art, but that there is also a visceral understanding in that. I think that also the way in which art can affect you and break down your defenses by taking you to that place of feeling, that even if you're not stepping in the shoes of another, you are experiencing your vulnerability. You are experiencing yourself as a feeling person, which can take you outside of the logic of what you may be doing or living in that moment in time. So I really, 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 really believe that. And, you know, just as I believe that I think arts, culture, humanities certainly need funding, I think that art and poetry have existed forever and will exist forever. So while I'm incredibly proud of, you know, funding poets laureates around the country to do projects in their you know, and so many things that have to do with the word, I'm less worried about the word disappearing because I don't think it ever will. I don't think it ever will. But to the funding part, you know, and I'll just leave us with a story of one of the most incredible grants. I think that we have this thing called the Monuments Project, that it took creativity, not writing poems, for me to dream up. And the Kaw people, they're native folks in Kansas, lived forever and ever and ever with a 25-ton sacred mount in their community. And 75 years ago in Lawrence, Kansas, the white people there literally took that 25-ton rock out of the ground. They stole it. They moved it to the center of Lawrence, Kansas. They posed around it and they captioned it, "Our Settler Heritage." They took a sacred mount for some people. Now, what I learned from that is like, wow, that's even more than putting up a man on a horse in an act of war. That's trying to make the earth tell a lie. Literally, okay? So, to the importance of the funding, you know, and we don't go around saying, you know, take that down. It offends me, you know? I mean, deep work has to happen in communities. So, 75 years pass, and there has been, with people at the university, with the Kaw people, with white people in Lawrence, Kansas, they've done deep repair work. Deep repair work. So when they came to us, they said, we want to move the rock back. And that's where resources matter. Because they literally, you couldn't even get people, you know, it costs $5 million to move that rock back to tell the whole truth. So that's why I do this work. And I think in that story is profound poetry. You know, I couldn't make that poem.
Right.
Right? I couldn't make it, so maybe it's happening another way.
Well, thank you for letting us stand in your words tonight. A round of applause for Elizabeth Alexander.
Thank you, Kyle. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all for coming.
And sorry we kept you a little late.
Thank you.
And we have signed books.
Signed books? Lots of signed books.
So please.
Should you wish.